You ever think about those news stories that just kind of stick with you? You know, the ones that just get in your head and never really leave?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So especially like back in the 80s, before we had the 2A47 News and all the true crime podcasts.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
certain cases just hit different back then. And that's what we're diving into today, those cases that just leave a mark, those that make you question everything you thought you knew.
Hmm.
We're going to be looking at two cases that really affected Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark from My Favorite Murder.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
These are stories they've talked about a lot, the ones that
Yeah.
got them into true crime way before it was
Yeah.
trendy.
Yeah, trendy.
I mean, it is fascinating how those early experiences can shape us. It's like they can shape not just our interests, but even, like whole careers.
Yeah.
It kind of speaks to the power of these stories, how they can just totally captivate us and stay with us, long after we've heard them.
Okay, so let's get into the first case. The attempted murder of David Rothenberg.
Okay.
This one really got to Georgia Hardstark.
Especially because it happened in 1983, right in her hometown of Orange County, California.
So picture this, you're 6 years old, excited to hang out with your dad. That's how the story starts. Young David Rothenberg visiting his father, Charles.
Sounds innocent enough,
Right.
but it wasn't a happy little father-son outing. After a huge fight with David's mom over the phone, Charles said something that still gives me chills. If I can't have him, nobody else can.
Wow.
And with those words, he set off a chain of events that changed David's life forever.
So what happened?
Well, Charles gave David a sleeping pill, waited for him to fall asleep, and then soaked his bed with kerosene.
Oh my
He
God.
kissed his son goodnight and then set the motel room on fire.
Dude, what?
Set it on fire.
Oh, that's horrible.
Can you imagine kissing your kid goodnight and then setting them on fire?
I can't even fathom it.
What kind of just detachment, what kind of rage could drive a person to do something so awful?
And to make matters worse, he didn't even try to run away. He just watched the whole motel room go up in flames from a phone booth across the street. Seriously.
Yeah, thankfully some people nearby saw the fire and ran in and saved David. But the damage was done.
I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have been for him.
For real. David ended up with third-degree burns over 90% of his body.
Oh my gosh.
The pain must have been excruciating, and the long-term scars, both physical and emotional, are just unimaginable. And at the time, doctors didn't think he would make it.
That's just heartbreaking.
It really is. But you know what's amazing? He did pull through. And in the middle of this whole awful tragedy, an unlikely friendship blossomed.
You're talking about David's relationship with Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah, Michael Jackson. He heard about what happened to David and reached out to him. He became a really close friend and mentor to this little boy. He gave him emotional support and even helped pay for David's extensive medical treatments.
Yeah, it's a complicated relationship for sure, especially with everything we know now. But back then, it gave David some sense of hope and normalcy in a world that had been completely turned upside down. It shows you that even in the darkest times, human connection and compassion can shine through.
It's a really powerful reminder. But while David was fighting to recover and finding comfort in this unusual friendship, what happened to his father, did he face justice?
Well, Charles Rothenberg was caught and convicted of attempted murder, but here's the thing that's really frustrating.
What's that?
He only served 7 years of his original 13-year sentence.
7 years for trying to kill his own son.
I know, it's hard to believe how the legal system could let that happen.
It really is.
And get this, to make things even worse, after he got out, Rothenberg committed more violent crimes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, including another attempted murder charge in 1990.
That's just unbelievable. So this pattern of violence just shows that whatever deep-seated issues he had, they weren't addressed during his time in prison.
Right.
Makes you wonder about how effective rehab programs are in the prison system. But let's go back to David. Despite everything he went through, he didn't let this horrific event define him. He changed his name to Dave, and pursued a life filled with creativity.
It's amazing.
He became a conceptual artist, a DJ,
Mhm.
and even an advocate against child abuse.
It's truly a remarkable story of resilience. He took his pain and turned it into a force for good. He's working to prevent others from suffering the way he did.
Now let's move on to the second case that really stayed with Karen Kilgariff. We're going to dive into the story of Diane Downs. This also happened in 1983.
Okay.
This case takes us to Springfield, Oregon, and introduces us to a seemingly regular young mother of three whose actions shocked the nation.
Oh, I think I've heard of this one. This case was all over the news, mainly because of Diane Downs' behavior and the crazy story she told.
It all started one night when Downs claimed she was driving her 3 kids on a late-night sightseeing trip.
Late night sightseeing with kids? That sounds strange right from the start.
Yeah, it's definitely odd. But Downs' story got even weirder.
How so?
She said that a shaggy-haired stranger flagged her down, demanded her car, and then shot her kids.
Oh, wow.
And that he also shot her in the arm.
So she was claiming she was a victim too.
Exactly. But the whole thing sounded like something out of a bad movie, and the police were immediately suspicious.
What made them doubt her?
Well, there were just too many things that didn't add up. Like, why would you take young kids out so late at night?
Yeah, that's weird.
And then there was Downs' demeanor when she was telling them what happened. She was strangely calm and unemotional, not at all how you'd expect a grieving mother to act.
That is strange.
And even the way her wound was bandaged, it was too neat, too perfectly wrapped.
Ugh.
Almost like she did it herself on purpose.
So it seemed like she was trying too hard to play the victim.
Exactly. And as the police investigated further, their suspicions only grew.
What did they find?
Well, they discovered a phone call Downs had made to her married lover right after she got to the hospital, something she conveniently left out of her original story.
So there was more to the story than she was letting on.
And then there was the drive to the hospital. Turns out Downs had driven really slowly and taken a much longer route than necessary.
Why would she do that?
Well, a witness later came forward and said they saw Downs' car moving incredibly slowly. It suggested that she was deliberately delaying getting her kids medical help.
Oh my gosh, that's just awful. To think a mother would put her own needs before the lives of her children?
It's a truly horrifying thought. But the most damning piece of evidence against Downs came from her own diary.
Her diary? What was in it?
The diary entries were like a window into Downs' mind. They revealed her obsession with her married lover and her desire for a life without her kids.
Wow, so she saw her kids as a burden.
Yeah, it seems that way. Her diary painted a very disturbing picture of a woman driven to do something unthinkable out of pure selfishness.
It's a classic case of appearances being deceiving. Here's this seemingly normal mom, someone you might see anywhere, and she's hiding these dark and twisted thoughts.
And that clash between her outward persona and her inner turmoil is what really captivated the public and fueled the media frenzy around this case.
I bet. But it wasn't just the diary, right? There was something about Diane Downs' behavior in public that solidified her image as well. Let's just say, not a grieving mother.
You're right. Her media appearances were really strange. She would laugh at inappropriate times, make comments about feeling sorry for herself, and seem more worried about how she looked than about her kids.
She was almost playing a role.
Yeah, and there's this one quote from an interview that's bone-chilling. She actually said, "I'm the real victim here."
Oh, wow.
That statement really sums up her twisted view of reality and her complete lack of remorse.
It shows how narcissism and self-deception can warp a person's mind to the point where they're totally blind to the consequences of their actions.
It's a frightening thought. But this story doesn't end there.
Right? The trial was just as captivating as the events leading up to it.
The trial was a huge deal, and Downs' surviving daughter, Christy, bravely took the stand.
Oh my goodness. That must have been so hard for her to face her own mother in court and testify against her.
It's hard to imagine the strength and courage it took for a young girl to stand up and tell the truth like that, to confront the person who was supposed to love and protect her, who had caused her so much pain.
Absolutely. And what did Christy say?
Christy revealed that there was no shaggy-haired stranger. It was their own mother who shot them.
Wow, that's a powerful moment. And what about after the trial? What happened to Christy and her brother, Danny?
Well, thankfully, there's a heartwarming ending to this dark story. The prosecuting attorney and his wife adopted Christy and Danny, giving them a loving and stable home.
That's so wonderful to hear. To open your home and heart to children who have been through so much, to give them a chance at a normal life after everything they've endured. It's truly inspiring.
It shows that even in the face of such terrible evil, there's still good in the world. And it highlights the power of empathy and the importance of creating safe and supportive environments for those who have been victimized. So here we have two cases, both involving parents turning on their own children. A betrayal of trust that's maybe the most fundamental violation you can imagine. They raise so many questions about the nature of evil, the complexities of the human mind, and the lasting effects of trauma.
And they really stress the importance of looking past those surface appearances. Neither Charles Rothenberg nor Diane Downs fit the typical image of a monster. They were regular people who blended right into society, making their crimes all the more shocking and disturbing. It's a harsh reminder that darkness can hide behind the most ordinary faces.
It makes you question your own judgments about people, about who you can trust and who you can't.
It's wild to think both of these cases happened in the same year, 1983.
Yeah, you're right. That year seems to hold some special significance for Karen in Georgia. It was a time when these stories really got under their skin, and it makes me think, maybe there's like a generational thing going on here.
What do you mean?
Well, we were just talking about how news stories back then felt different, like before the internet and the 24/7 news cycle. Maybe those of us who grew up in that era, without the constant barrage of information, were just more likely to be deeply affected by these kinds of cases.
I see what you mean. It's like the scarcity of these stories made them more powerful, more likely to stick with you.
Exactly. And Karen and Georgia were both young kids when these things happened, about the same age as David Rothenberg.
Oh, wow.
I can only imagine how these stories must have messed with their sense of safety and innocence, like suddenly realizing that the world could be a much darker place than they thought.
Absolutely. For Georgia especially, the David Rothenberg case happening right in her own neighborhood must have been a huge wake-up call. It forced her to confront this horrifying reality that even a parent, someone who's supposed to love and protect you, could be capable of such cruelty.
And then the Diane Downs case just reinforced that unsettling truth. Here's this seemingly normal mother, someone you might run into at the store or at school, and she turns out to be harboring these dark and twisted desires. It's a stark reminder that we can't always judge a book by its cover.
Totally. And you know what's interesting? Both of these cases really highlight the fact that we need to look beyond those surface appearances. Neither Charles Rothenberg nor Diane Downs fit the stereotype of a monster. They were everyday people who blended right into society, and that makes their crimes even more shocking and unsettling.
Yeah, it's like a real-life lesson in not judging people based on how they look, but with much higher stakes.
Yeah.
Makes you question everything you think you know about people, about who you can trust and who you can't.
Exactly. And this idea ties into a major theme that runs through My Favorite Murder. It's this notion that we need to be aware of the potential for darkness, even in unexpected places.
So it's not about living in fear, but about being more aware, more vigilant.
Right. It's about being informed, empowered, and prepared.
And Karen and Georgia often talk about trusting your gut instincts, listening to those little alarm bells that go off when something feels off. They encourage their listeners, especially women, to prioritize their safety and to not ignore those feelings of unease.
That's such an important message, especially for women who are often taught to be polite and accommodating, even when they might feel unsafe. It's about reclaiming your voice, your power, and your right to feel safe and secure in the world.
And I think that's a big part of why My Favorite Murder resonates so strongly with women. It creates this space where they can connect over shared experiences of vulnerability and resilience. They can talk about these taboo subjects openly and honestly without fear of judgment.
It's like a collective way of facing those fears and anxieties. Listeners can process these difficult emotions and find strength in shared vulnerability.
Yeah, and it speaks to the power of storytelling. It helps us make sense of the world around us, even the scariest parts.
Definitely. Sharing these stories, dissecting them, analyzing them, it helps us understand the complexities of human behavior. What motivates people to commit these horrible acts?
And by trying to understand the why and the how, we can hopefully learn from these tragedies, identify patterns, and work towards preventing similar events from happening in the future.
So as we're discussing these cases, what were some of the details that stood out to you as particularly disturbing or memorable?
For me, it's the level of planning, especially in the Diane Downs case. The fact that she plotted this out in advance and made up a story to cover her tracks. That's what I find truly unsettling. It shows a coldness and a lack of empathy that's hard to grasp.
Yeah, those diary entries where she talks about being frustrated with her kids and wanting to be with her lover are chilling. They give you a glimpse into the mind of someone consumed by their own selfish desires with no regard for the lives of her own children. It's a harsh reminder that evil can wear an ordinary face.
And in the David Rothenberg case, the image of Charles Rothenberg watching his son burn from across the street, that just sticks with me. The fact that he witnessed his own horrific crime and didn't do anything to stop it, it speaks to a level of attachment that's both baffling and terrifying.
It's a bone-chilling image for sure. And it makes you wonder what kind of mental state could lead someone to commit such an act. It's a question that has puzzled psychologists and criminologists for years. What drives a parent to turn against their own child to cause them so much pain?
And it's a question without easy answers. Each case is unique with its own set of individual circumstances, personality traits, and external pressures. But both of these cases highlight the devastating consequences when those factors combine to create a perfect storm of darkness.
And they force us to acknowledge this uncomfortable truth that the potential for evil, for darkness, exists within us all. It's a sobering thought, but an important one. By recognizing this potential, by understanding what contributes to these horrific acts, we can hopefully work towards creating a world where these tragedies are less likely to happen.
It's about finding that balance right, acknowledging the real dangers out there, while still holding on to hope and our connection to humanity. Because if we let fear and distrust consume us, then the darkness wins.
I agree. It's about using our knowledge of these dark realities to fuel empathy, compassion, and a commitment to building a safer and more just world.
And maybe, just maybe by shedding light on these dark corners of human behavior, we can begin to understand them better and work towards preventing them from happening again. So it feels like we've been kind of wrestling with this question this whole time, like what makes a parent do something so unthinkable to their own child?
It's a question that has haunted everyone who hears these cases, and the truth is there's no simple answer. Every case is different. It's a mix of personal circumstances, personality, and outside pressures.
So you're saying we can't predict this kind of behavior, like there are no warning signs.
It's impossible to say for sure what someone will do, but there are some patterns that we see in these types of cases.
Like what?
We often see personality disorders like narcissism or antisocial tendencies, and there's often a history of trauma either in the person's own life or within their family.
Like a cycle of trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned external pressures. How do those play into it?
Well, think of it like this. External pressures, they can be the thing that pushes someone over the edge. Things like money problems, losing a job, relationship issues, substance abuse, all of these can create a really stressful environment where violence can become a tragic outlet.
It's like all these factors come together to create this perfect storm. And what's so disturbing about these cases is that neither Charles Rothenberg nor Diane Downs fit the image of a typical monster. They seem like average people blending right in. That makes it even more shocking.
Absolutely. It challenges our ideas of who is capable of violence.
Yeah.
You want to think that evil is easy to spot, that it looks a certain way. But the truth is much more complicated. The line between normal and not normal is often blurry.
It's a chilling thought. It makes you realize that darkness can hide anywhere. And that brings us back to that question we asked at the beginning. How have these cases and the rise of true crime in media changed how we view safety and trust?
I think it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, being more aware of these crimes can be empowering. It encourages us to be more careful, to be more selective in our relationships, and to push for changes that protect vulnerable people.
But there must be a downside too, right?
Yeah.
Does it make us more afraid, more suspicious of everyone?
There's definitely a risk of that. Hearing too many of these stories can make us feel like the world is a dangerous place and make us distrustful of others.
So it's like we retreat into ourselves convinced that danger is everywhere.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to think critically. We need to engage with these stories thoughtfully without letting fear control us or warp our view of reality.
So it's about finding that balance, recognizing the real dangers, but also holding on to hope and our connection to others.
Right. It's about using what we learn from these dark realities to become more empathetic, more compassionate, and more dedicated to creating a safer world.
And maybe, just maybe by talking about these difficult topics, we can start to understand them better and work towards preventing them from happening again. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these two cases, I want to leave you with this thought. How has true crime shaped your view of the world? Has it made you more cautious, more understanding, or more aware of just how complicated people can be?
We encourage you to really think about these questions and keep exploring these stories that both fascinate and challenge us. Because in the end, it's by understanding the darkness that we can try to create a brighter future.
And as Karen and Georgia would say, stay curious, stay informed, and stay sexy, and don't get murdered.